I want to follow up what Christina said because it may not be entirely clear, but each of the speakers mentioned this, that the purified THC has been available in the United States since 1986 for any doctor to prescribe to any patient. So that has not been difficult to get access to. But of course, as I mentioned, it's irrelevant to the people who are promoting medical marijuana, who just want to smoke marijuana. I wonder, Christina, is there any possibility that the INCB would find the United States in non-compliance and insist that the United States become in compliance?
Well, I really wish a member of the INCB would be here to tell you exactly what measures could be taken, but they have expressed their concern about it, and what the INCB usually does is that they have a confident talk with the country in question. They don't expose the country publicly.
That's unfortunate.
But the possibility to speak to the United States on this is always there, and I think they are very clear that the country doesn't fulfill the obligations in this particular case.
Okay. I'd like to have questions from any of you. Who would like to step up? Here you go. Anybody have any questions? It's pretty clear that the speakers have lots of things they could say if you don't have questions.
Yes. My name is Pelle Olsson. I'm a journalist here from Stockholm. David Evans had a list of explanations how it could be possible for having these ballots, and that it's possible that 14 states have approved medical marijuana. But one argument I did not understand quite, you said that there was lots of money involved in this, and it was Mr. Soros and Mr. Lewis who has financed this. But you have the whole federal state behind you, the whole established official United States. Couldn't you sort of balance these millions they have?
You would think that in a country that's as well organized as the United States, it would be able to stop this. But here's the problem: the ballot initiatives, the way that works, is that the pro-drug people pay people to go out and get signatures on the ballot requests. So they'll get 100,000 or 200,000 people. A lot of them might be marijuana users, and it goes on a public ballot. And so when there's an election in November, there is something written on the ballot basically saying, do you approve or not approve of medical marijuana? So then it becomes a matter for the public to make the decision. The government is out of it at that point. And that's the purpose of the ballot initiatives, so that the citizens could have direct democracy and vote on something without going through their parliament or their legislature. So once it gets on the ballot, and that's just a matter of money, hiring people to go and get the signatures, people sign a document saying, I want this to be on the ballot for a vote. Then it goes to advertising, and they go on television. And in Michigan, they had a gentleman whose wife had died of cancer, and he gets on television and talks about how it would be nice if his wife had been able to use marijuana, and he starts to cry. And they put this all over the television, and people watch it, and they say, oh, that poor man, and I'm going to vote for this. The government, first of all, the federal government is not allowed to interfere in a state legislative process, making state laws. They can only come in when they're invited to. They're not allowed to spend government money to what we call lobbying, trying to affect state laws. So the federal government is impotent here. The other problem is that when you do this on the state level, and again I'll use Michigan as an example, we spent 6 months trying to get people in Michigan to understand what was happening, what this ballot initiative was all about. And the medical marijuana issue is a complicated issue. We started in January. The ballot initiative was in November. We did not get people engaged in Michigan until August. So we had maybe 2 or 3 months, whereas the other side had been working on this for years. In New Jersey, they had full-time paid professional staff working on this for years. We're volunteers. They hired the biggest lobbying firm in New Jersey. These guys get paid $300-400 an hour. They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. They gave money to the politicians. When the politician would have a barbecue to raise money, they would buy 10 tickets. So they give money. The Rhode Island legislature, for example, almost every single member of the Rhode Island legislature got money from George Soros. Governor Richardson in New Mexico got $50,000. $50,000. We won the vote in the legislature in New Mexico by 2 or 3 votes. Governor Richardson got $50,000 from Soros, called in some of the legislators, threatened them if they didn't change their vote that there was going to be a very negative consequence, and they changed their votes. How do I know that? They told me personally. These legislators told me that personally. We have a lot of difficulty competing with that. When you go out and you talk to people about medical marijuana, they're very confused about it. And you talk to law enforcement or treatment agencies or the medical profession, because they have this perception that marijuana is not that bad to begin with. It could help some people, and there is some accuracy, and it does have some therapeutic value. And then to explain the whole issue about FDA approval and everything else is very complicated. It takes a lot of resources. Right now, President Obama's drug czar has come out against medical marijuana, but nobody pays attention to it on the state level because there's this hostility towards Washington, D.C. right now. So it's very hard. Believe me, we've tried everything. The only solution is to, first of all, if you're in a state where this hasn't happened yet, start working on it now. If you're in a country where this hasn't happened yet, start working on it now. Get to your legislators now. Give them the information now before they get influenced by the pro-drug lobby. And that's what we're trying to do. Now, these bills have been around for 6, 7, 8 years. We've defeated 80% of them. So we've been successful in most of the states. Okay. It usually goes along party lines. States that are Democratic, we have 2 parties in the United States, Democrats and Republicans. Democratic states have a tendency to vote these bills in. They have a tendency to vote for legalization of marijuana. Republican states don't vote for it. So it is a partisan issue, unfortunately. It shouldn't be, but it is.
I have one question. Is there any evidence saying that smoking marijuana is carcinogenic? And if so, more than smoking tobacco?
I can speak to that just very quickly. Dr. Madras should address that. But I will tell you, the state of California last summer came out with a position that, and nobody can accuse the state of California of being prejudiced against marijuana, but the state Environmental Protection Agency looked at 30 studies and came out saying that marijuana smoke causes cancer. So now we have states that are approving something as a medicine that has been documented by the state of California to cause cancer. Yeah. Well, there's just lots of money, Dr. Madras, but this is how irrational this issue is. Imagine if a big pharmaceutical company like Roche started pushing a medicine and a state determined that medicine causes cancer. They would get nowhere. The medical establishment would be in an outrage about this. That's exactly what's happening here. And if you send me an email, ask me for the medical information, I will send you the thing from California showing that it causes cancer.
I am a member of the American Society of Addiction Medicine, the physicians in the United States who've studied addiction. And along with Andrea Bartho, another member, have written the position paper for this group of physicians about this. And it is completely clear that smoked marijuana is not a medicine. There's no ambiguity whatsoever. But it's very striking that many of the most distinguished newspapers in the United States support medical marijuana. How they can do that is completely beyond me, but they do. And usually the word that David has used, passion, gets into this discussion, and it's very unfortunate.
Yes, I have a question. We heard here from Christine August's presentation that if you don't fulfill the requirement in the convention to cultivate cannabis for different purposes, you violate the conventions. To violate the conventions, isn't that the question for the federal government to look at? I mean, is it up to the states to do that? So isn't there a place for an intervention from the federal level then to fulfill the requirement in the convention?
Just first of all, politically in the United States, nobody cares very much about the United Nations. And there is a problem with that right now because of gun control. I guess there's a United Nations convention now, or they're thinking about one that would control the private ownership of guns. That's going to have a lot of opposition in the United States, and there'll be a lot of opposition to anything from the United Nations. We have repeatedly brought up the issue that this violates the UN conventions. Repeatedly. We stopped doing it. Nobody pays attention. Nobody cares. And it's been, every time we bring it up, and I've just stopped the last year or two, stopped doing it because it's a waste of time. Nobody cares. Nobody asks me about it. And we make it very clear to them that it violates UN conventions. They don't care.
Just in the previous administration, the Drug Enforcement Agency did raid a number of marijuana growers and producers and sellers in California and other states in order to uphold federal law, because federal law has not approved marijuana as a medicine. And so we're seeing a difference now in terms of the federal response to this issue, in that the DEA is not actively engaged any longer in terrifying the dealers, which was the case in the previous era.
I also say something about the federal government. One group of American citizens is drug tested very systematically, and that is all commercial drivers. So there are 12 million people with commercial driver's licenses in the United States, regulated by the U.S. Department of Transportation. Medical marijuana does not qualify. Any medical marijuana commercial driver will be taken off the road by the U.S. Department of Transportation. So there's an example where the federal government is actually opposed to medical marijuana. So there's just some differences, and there's one that they're doing the right thing.
And just on the issue of the federal government, under the Bush administration, the policy was that they would only prosecute medical marijuana dispensaries if they were violating federal law and state law. Almost immediately after Obama administration took control, they came out with an announcement saying that they were not going to prosecute the medical marijuana dispensaries unless they were violating federal and state law. It's the same policy as the Bush administration, but they announced it, and it was widely interpreted as Obama saying, we're not going to touch medical marijuana, we're not going after you. Once they did that, things then really got out of control all over the United States. The dispensaries just popped up everywhere because nobody was afraid anymore. The federal government wasn't going to do anything about it. And we thought that was very, very unfortunate, that they should have at least not announced this, and at least there would have been a threat. So now in Los Angeles, there are 800 or 900 of them. The prosecutor for Los Angeles is now trying to shut them all down because they violate federal law. But imagine trying to shut down 800 places. I mean, you just don't have enough law enforcement resources to do all of that. And that's the danger. Once these places get in, they start making a lot of money, thousands and thousands of dollars every day. They hire lawyers, they form trade associations, they hire lobbyists, they start spreading money around the legislature, and these things get through. So that's why it's a good idea to just stop it as early on as you can. We will do everything we can to help you. We have a lot of information, but the key is getting people in your country or your state to start focusing on it now and start making an impression with the legislature now. In Kansas, for example, which is a conservative state, it got brought up to the legislature and they didn't even hear it. They just said, forget this, we're not even going to talk about this.
We have 3 more people want to ask questions. Can you do 3 more questions? Yeah, sure. So, quick, because some of the too late is over.
To Berta Matters, in Argentina, Buenos Aires, it's recommended for chronic pain, chronic pain that not remit with verapamilo and topiramato, recommended marijuana. Some physician, some neurologist, can it be possible this have scientific level that?
Let me just say, remember, that THC is available right now. And as Christina Olga says, there's no evidence that smoked marijuana would do anything that purifies THC does for chronic pain or anything else. So I think that that's very dubious that there would be any example where that is. If I were a betting person about the future of these cannabinoids as treatments, I wouldn't bet on it. And I can tell you, it isn't just me. The pharmaceutical companies are not betting on it either.
It's the same. I feel the same. But I'm sure that that is the...
I mean, the marijuana users who've been given marijuana for their alleged conditions claim that they can regulate the dose by smoking better than if they take the pill orally. There's a whole shopping list of talking points they have on how they justify smoking. But the interesting thing is that none of these justifications apply to any other medication. None of them. Okay.
One of the things that's very striking about smoking as a route of administration is drug abusers like to smoke the drug. Medical patients don't. Why is that? That's because the way brain reward works is with a sudden rise of the blood level. That's why injecting and smoking are preferred routes of administration for drug abusers, but not for any medical treatment. So I think there's a very big question, at least in my mind, of why these people prefer to have smoked rather than oral. Because what they're really getting is not the therapeutic effect that you would normally think, but the brain reward effect that they like. So they can tell the difference, there's no doubt about that, and they prefer the smoking. But I don't think that's because of effect on pain directly. I think it's an effect on brain reward, where that administration makes a very big difference.
We have a legal question here from a young lawyer. Gazal, please.
Yeah, I just have a question. I was wondering, marijuana is illegal in the States, so is it possible to prosecute the doctors that write this recommendation and the owner of the dispensaries for the crime of sedition?
Yeah. Okay. Well, the thing is, you could prosecute the doctor under federal law. Doctors have what's called a DEA license to dispense or give out or recommend controlled substances like opiates and so forth. But that's if you prescribe it. The doctors don't prescribe it. They just recommend it. They say, well, this might be helpful for somebody. And they sign the recommendation. And it's not a prescription. And this went to federal court already. And the federal court said that the doctors under our Constitution have what we call a First Amendment right, freedom of speech. So they have a right to talk with a patient about marijuana and to say marijuana may be helpful to you. They have a right to do that, and it's not a prescription. I think that can be challenged because some of these state laws are so specific about what the doctor can and cannot do that it does get into a prescription. The question is, will the Obama administration do anything about that?
There's another avenue, and that would be through the Board of Registration in Medicine. Each state has a board that determines whether or not a physician is practicing medicine according to best medical practices in terms of the current state of medicine. And the Board of Registration in Medicine could have enormous clout because they are entitled to remove a physician's license. But in some of these states, I believe in California, they are not allowed to engage in this.
Yeah, a lot of the laws specifically exempt physicians from any control by their state licensing board or medical society if they just follow the medical marijuana law. So they've taken care of that.
Yeah.
There is one other way, though, that physicians can be held accountable, and that's through malpractice activities related to accidents and things that happen to these people, including addiction. And I think that they very, very well may be civil suits brought against the physicians. And I can tell you as a physician, physicians will react to that. The first time you get an award, a verdict, or an award in that kind of a case, then I think there will probably be lots of examples of that coming down the road. So that is one avenue that could change behavior. Though, as David said, the number of physicians who are involved in this is very tiny. It's not. Most doctors are not. It's a very small number of doctors who make this their business to do this.